Welcome back to our channel.
Welcome. I am Lisa.
And I'm Eric. Do you want to improve your English easily? If so, you're in the right place.
So let's get started and make English easy. So Eric, what are the words today?
The first word today is ordinary. Then we will continue with consequently and to blame. Then to walk out on. And the final one is in the heat of the moment.
Okay, let's start with the first word.
The first word is ordinary.
Ordinary.
Ordinary is an adjective, and it means something normal or not special. When something is ordinary, it's common, usual, or just like many other things. Here's an example sentence. The restaurant was nice, but the food was just ordinary. It means that the food wasn't special or amazing. It was normal, like what you would find in many other restaurants.
That's a good example. Here's another one. She wore an ordinary dress to the party, nothing too fancy. It means that the dress was simple and normal, not very fancy or different from what most people wear.
Good example. So you can use it for almost anything, people, places, clothes, or even events. It's a very flexible word. Now, let's practice using ordinary in a short dialogue. Are you ready, Lisa?
I'm ready. Let's go.
How was your weekend?
It was pretty ordinary. I just stayed home and watched TV.
That sounds relaxing. Sometimes an ordinary weekend is exactly what you need.
Yeah, nothing special, but it was nice.
In this dialogue, Emma describes her weekend as ordinary because she didn't do anything special. She just stayed home and relaxed.
Ordinary is a great word to use when you want to say something is normal or usual, and it's often used in casual conversations like this. Eric, do you think ordinary is a formal or informal word?
I'd say it's pretty neutral. You can use ordinary in both formal and informal situations. In everyday conversations, people might say, "It was just an ordinary day." But in formal writing or speeches, you can also use it, like, "He lived an ordinary life."
I agree. It's a very common word that fits in many different situations. Do you think ordinary is a positive or negative word?
It really depends on the situation. Sometimes ordinary can be neutral or even positive, like in our dialogue where Emma had a nice, relaxing weekend. But other times, ordinary might be negative, like when people want something special or different.
I think that's right. Sometimes ordinary is perfectly fine, but other times people want something more exciting or unique. So, listeners, if you want to describe something normal or usual, ordinary is the word to use. Well, I think that's it for today's word, ordinary. Okay, shall we move on to the next word, Eric?
Yes, let's do it. The next word is consequently.
Consequently.
Consequently is an adverb. It's used to show that something happened as a result of something else. It's similar to the phrase as a result or so. When you use consequently, you are explaining that one thing caused another thing to happen.
Let's give some examples so that our listeners understand better. Could you start, Eric?
Sure, Lisa. Here's the first example sentence. He didn't study for the exam. Consequently, he failed. This means that because he didn't study, he failed the exam. Consequently shows the connection between not studying and failing.
Great example, Eric. Here's mine. It rained all morning. Consequently, the game was canceled. It means that because it rained all morning, the game couldn't happen, so it was canceled. The cancellation was a result of the rain.
Great. And here's a quick grammar tip. Consequently usually comes at the beginning of the second part of the sentence. It helps connect two ideas and explain the cause and effect. For example, the road was icy. Consequently, there were many accidents.
That's a good point, Eric. Now let's practice using consequently in a short conversation. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
We didn't get the materials on time. Consequently, we had to delay the project.
Yes, and consequently, we missed the deadline. We really need to be more organized next time.
In this conversation, John uses consequently to explain why they had to delay the project. It was because they didn't get the materials on time.
Right. Consequently is a great word to show cause and effect in situations like this. Eric, do you think consequently is more formal or informal?
I'd say it's definitely more formal. You might use it in essays, reports, or professional emails. In casual conversations, most people would probably just say so or because of that. For example, I woke up late, so I missed my meeting.
I agree. It's very common in written English, like in academic writing or official documents. Do you think it's a difficult word for learners?
It can be tricky at first, but once you understand that, it's just another way to say because of that or so.
That's a good way to put it. So, listeners, when you want to explain that something happened as a result of something else, and you want to sound a bit more formal, remember to use consequently. It's a great word for more professional or serious situations.
Exactly, and that wraps up our explanation of today's word, consequently.
Okay, let's move on to our next word. Eric, what's the next word?
The next word is to blame.
To blame.
To blame means to say or think that someone or something is responsible for a problem or bad situation.
That's right. We use it when we point out who or what caused something negative to happen.
Exactly. Let me give our first example sentence. The coach blamed the team's loss on poor training.
It means that, the coach said, the team lost because they didn't train well enough.
Good explanation. Now it's your turn, Lisa. Can you give us another example?
Sure. Here's another example. Don't blame me for the traffic. I didn't cause it.
It means that the person is saying they are not responsible for the traffic problem and others shouldn't say it's their fault.
Now, let's talk about how to use this word. Blame is a verb, and we often use it with for or on. For example, he blamed her for the mistake, or she blamed the accident on bad weather or on him.
Good point. Now, let's hear a short dialogue using the word blame.
The presentation didn't go as planned. What happened?
I don't know. Some people blame the new software, but I think we just needed more practice.
Yeah, I agree. I guess there's no one person to blame.
That was a good example. The word to blame was used a couple of times to show that people were trying to figure out who was responsible for the problem.
Exactly. It's a really useful phrase when something goes wrong. Lisa, do you think to blame is common in everyday conversation?
Oh, definitely. People use it all the time when they want to talk about responsibility.
What about being more formal or informal?
I'd say it's neutral. It works in both formal and informal situations. You might use it in everyday conversation like, don't blame me for this, or in more formal situations like at work or school when discussing problems.
I think so too. It's one of those words that you hear in both casual and serious conversations. People like to use it when they need to explain why something bad happened.
That's true. Well, I hope everyone understands to blame better now. It's a word you'll hear often.
Yep, let's move on to the next word. The next word is to walk out on.
To walk out on.
To walk out on is a phrasal verb. It means to leave someone or something suddenly, usually because you're angry or unhappy.
We use it when someone abandons a person, job, or situation in a sudden way.
Exactly. Let me give an example sentence. He walked out on his job after an argument with his boss.
It means that the person suddenly left his job because he had a fight with his boss.
Good explanation. Now it's your turn, Lisa. Can you give us another example?
Sure. Here's another example. She walked out on her husband after 10 years of marriage. It means that the woman suddenly left her husband and ended their marriage after 10 years.
That's right. Now let's talk about how to use this phrase. Walk out on is always followed by a person or thing that is being left, like on someone or on something.
Now let's hear a short dialogue using the phrase walk out on.
Did you hear about Tom?
No, what happened?
He walked out on the team right before the big game.
Really? Why would he do that?
I'm not sure, but I knew he had also walked out on his wife a few weeks ago.
I see. He must be going through hard times.
That was a useful example. It shows how walk out on can express disappointment or surprise at someone's actions.
Yes, and it also shows that it's often used to describe unexpected or dramatic situations.
Absolutely. So, Eric, do you think walk out on is a common phrase in English?
It's fairly common, especially in conversations about relationships or work situations.
That's true. Is it more formal or informal?
I would say it's more informal. We use it a lot in everyday speech, but probably not in formal writing. It's a colorful way to describe leaving a situation. It's more expressive than just saying leave or quit.
Exactly. Well, I think we've covered walk out on pretty well. Shall we move on to our next word?
Yes, let's do that. Remember, listeners, we hope you won't walk out on us before the end of the podcast.
Great reminder, Eric. Okay, what is the last word for today, Eric?
The last word today is in the heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment is an idiom that means doing or saying something suddenly without thinking because you're feeling strong emotions, like anger, excitement, or stress.
Yes, it's used when someone acts quickly because they are upset, excited, or angry. It's like losing control for a short time. Now, let's give some example sentences. Eric, could you go ahead with the first one?
Sure, this is the first example sentence. I yelled at my friend in the heat of the moment, but I didn't mean to. It means that the person was angry or upset, and without thinking, they yelled at their friend. Later, they realized they didn't really want to yell, but it happened because of their strong emotions at that time.
Right. Here's another example. She quit her job in the heat of the moment, but now she regrets it. This means that she made a quick decision to leave her job because she was upset or stressed, but later she realized it wasn't the best choice. She acted without thinking, clearly.
Good example, Lisa. This idiom is informal. People often use this explanation when they regret or didn't plan something. It's not used in formal writing, but is common in everyday speech. Now, let's move on to a short dialogue to show how in the heat of the moment can be used in a conversation.
Did you hear about Sarah and Mike's fight last night?
No, what happened?
Well, in the heat of the moment, Sarah threw Mike's phone out the window.
Oh no, that's terrible.
She apologized and said she acted in the heat of the moment and feels really bad now.
I hope they can work things out.
That was a good example, Lisa. It shows how in the heat of the moment can explain sudden emotional actions.
Yes, and it also shows that people often regret things they do in the heat of the moment. So, Eric, do you think in the heat of the moment is a common phrase in English?
Absolutely. You'll hear it very often when someone explains why they acted a certain way in emotional situations. It's informal, so it's great for casual conversations, but not something you would write in a formal letter or report.
I agree. It's a very useful phrase because we all sometimes act quickly when we feel strong emotions.
Exactly. So remember, when you do something without thinking because of strong emotions, you can say it happened in the heat of the moment.
Okay. We hope you found the words today helpful.
Thanks for listening. Keep studying your English and try not to make decisions in the heat of the moment.
What are the words today?
The first word today is sharp. Then we will continue with the pros and cons and to treat, then to burst out, and the final one is call it a day.
Let's start with the first word, Eric.
The first word today is sharp.
Sharp.
Sharp is an adjective. It has two meanings. The first meaning is something that has a fine edge, like a knife. The second meaning is when something happens suddenly, quickly, or strongly.
Yes. Sharp is a word we hear a lot in different contexts. Let's start with the first meaning, something that can cut, like a knife or tool. Eric, would you like to give an example?
Sure. Here's the first example sentence. Be careful with that broken glass. It's very sharp. It means that the edge of the broken glass can easily cut you because it has a fine point or edge.
Great. Now let's look at the second meaning of sharp, when something happens suddenly or quickly. Here's my example. There was a sharp change in the weather this afternoon. It means that the weather changed suddenly and strongly.
That's a good point. Now let's hear an example dialogue using both meanings of the word sharp.
Tom, please be careful with that scissors. It's very sharp.
Okay, Mom. Oh, I just felt a sharp pain in my finger.
Oh no! Did you cut yourself? Let me see.
No, I didn't. But I moved my hand too quickly and hit the table.
I see. Well, be more careful next time. Sharp objects and sharp movements can both be dangerous.
That was a good example, Eric. It shows both meanings of sharp, the cutting edge and the sudden, intense feeling.
Yes, and it also shows how common this word is in everyday situations.
Exactly. Now, Eric, how often do you think people use this word?
It's pretty common. You hear it a lot in daily life, like when talking about sharp tools, sharp pains, or even sharp turns in a car. But sometimes it's used more in formal situations, like business reports. For example, a sharp increase in sales.
So, it's a flexible word. You can use it in both formal and informal conversations, right?
Definitely, and it's helpful for describing anything quick, strong, or dangerous, like sharp pain, sharp rise, or sharp objects.
Exactly. Well, I think we've covered sharp pretty well. Shall we move on to our next word?
Yes, let's do that. The next word is the pros and cons.
The pros and cons.
The pros and cons is used when we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of something. For example, before buying a new phone, I need to think about the pros and cons.
Or, there are the pros and cons of living in a big city.
Great example, Lisa. Now, let's give more example sentences. My example is, before buying a new phone, I need to think about the pros and cons. It means that, before making a decision, I want to look at both the good and bad points of buying a phone. Pros are the good points, and cons are the bad points.
Here's mine. There are pros and cons of living in a big city. This means that there are both good things and bad things about living in a big city. For example, a pro might be that there are lots of job opportunities, but a con might be that it's very noisy or expensive.
Exactly. So, when we talk about the pros and cons, we're talking about the positive and negative sides of something.
Let's give our listeners a simple dialogue using the pros and cons.
I'm thinking about buying that car.
That's a big decision. Have you thought about the pros and cons?
Yeah, I know the pros, like it's more comfortable, but the cons are that it's expensive and I don't really need it right now.
So, in this dialogue, Emma is thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of buying a new car.
Exactly. It shows how we can use the pros and cons to help us make decisions, whether it's about buying something, moving, or even choosing a job.
Eric, would you say the pros and cons is a common phrase?
Yes, it's very common in both formal and informal English. You can hear it in business meetings when people talk about decisions or even in casual conversations with friends.
I agree. It's a simple but useful phrase that everyone should know. It also helps people think carefully before making choices.
Yes, that's why it's good to learn. You can use it when you're weighing two sides of something, like deciding between two options or thinking about the future.
Exactly. Well, I think we've covered pros and cons pretty well. Let's move on to the next word.
Okay, Lisa. The next word is to treat.
To treat.
To treat has a few different meanings, but today we'll focus on two of them. The first meaning is how you behave towards someone. The second meaning is to cure an illness or injury.
To treat is a very versatile word. Let's start with the first meaning, how you behave towards others. Eric, would you like to give the first example?
Sure. Here's the first example sentence. You should always treat people with respect. It means that you should behave politely and kindly toward other people.
Perfect. Now, let's look at the second meaning, which is about curing someone, as a doctor does. Here's my example. The doctor is treating my brother for the flu. It means that the doctor provides medical care to help your brother get better from the flu.
Exactly. Here's a quick grammar note. When you use treat in the medical sense, it's often followed by an illness or condition like treat a cold or treat an injury.
That's a helpful tip. Now, let's hear a sample dialogue where the word treat is used in both ways.
I had to take my dog to the vet today. He wasn't feeling well, but the vet treated him for an infection.
Oh no, I hope your dog feels better soon. By the way, I noticed how kindly you treat your dog. You're always so caring.
Thanks, Jack. I believe it's important to treat animals with love.
That was a nice example. We heard treat used to talk about curing an illness for a pet, and we also heard it used to describe how someone behaves toward their dog.
Yes, Lisa. It's great how one word can have such different meanings.
Eric, do you think treat is a common word in English?
Yes, it's very common. We use it in both formal and informal situations. You can hear it in daily conversations about how people behave, or in medical settings when talking about doctors and health.
That's true. You can use it in many situations, from how someone treats their family to how a doctor treats an illness.
And don't forget, it's always helpful to know when to use treat with the right prepositions, like treat someone with respect or treat an illness.
Yes, that's a great tip. Well, I hope everyone now understands how to use to treat in both ways. It's a word you'll hear often.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, let's move on to the next word.
The next word is burst out.
Burst out.
Burst out is a phrasal verb that means to suddenly start doing something, like laughing, crying, or speaking loudly. It's when something happens quickly and with a lot of energy.
That's right. Burst out is often used when emotions come out suddenly. Let's give some example sentences to help explain it.
Sure. Here's the first example sentence. She told a funny joke and everyone burst out laughing. It means that everyone started laughing suddenly because they found the joke really funny.
Great example. Now, here's my example. When he heard the news, he burst out crying. It means that he started crying suddenly because the news made him very emotional.
Exactly. A quick grammar tip. After burst out, we often use a verb with ing, like burst out laughing or burst out crying.
That's a good point. Now, let's listen to a sample dialogue where the phrase burst out is used.
I couldn't help it. When the teacher made that mistake, I burst out laughing in class.
Really? I bet everyone looked at you.
They did, but everybody would burst out laughing in a situation like that. It was hilarious.
That was a fun example. Burst out was used to talk about starting to laugh suddenly because something was really funny.
Exactly. It shows how burst out perfectly describes moments when emotions come out suddenly.
Eric, how often do you think people use this word?
People use it a lot, especially when they talk about emotions like laughter or crying. It's informal and usually used in friendly situations.
I agree. It's a great way to describe moments that are full of sudden energy. You can use it when you want to show that something happened quickly and strongly.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone now understands how to use burst out. It's a fun and expressive phrase.
Okay, now it's time to explain the last word of today.
Okay, Lisa, the last word today is call it a day.
Call it a day.
Call it a day is an idiom. It means to stop doing something, usually because you've done enough for that day. It's often used when people stop their work or a task for the day.
That's right. Call it a day is used when you decide to stop working or doing something because you think it's time to rest. Let's give some example sentences to make it clearer. Here's the first example sentence. After 5 hours of cleaning, we decided to call it a day. It means that after cleaning for 5 hours, they felt they had done enough and decided to stop for the day.
Great! Now, here's my example. After 5 hours of studying, I decided to call it a day. It means that after studying for 5 hours, I stopped for the day because I was tired or felt like I had done enough work.
Exactly. This idiom is often used when people are tired or feel they've done enough work for one day.
A quick note. Call it a day is an informal idiom and is often used in conversations at work or when doing tasks with others.
That's a good tip. Now, let's listen to a sample dialogue where the idiom, call it a day, is used.
I'm really tired. We've been cleaning the house for hours.
Yeah, me too. Let's call it a day and finish tomorrow.
Good idea. I think we've done enough for today.
In this dialogue, Mike and Emma decided to call it a day after cleaning for a long time. It means they wanted to stop cleaning and finish the rest later. Eric, would you say call it a day is a common phrase?
Definitely. It's a very casual phrase, and you hear it a lot in everyday situations, especially when people are working together or doing something that takes time.
I agree. It's a simple way to say, let's stop for now, and you'll hear it often when people are ready to take a break or finish their work for the day.
That's right. I hope everyone now understands how to use call it a day. It's a great phrase to know, especially when you're ready to stop working.
Well, we hope you found the words helpful and the explanations easy to understand.
Thanks for listening. Keep studying your English.
And stay tuned. Bye for now.